So in my last video, I titled it, Can France Accept a Multipolar World with China on top, or something along those lines. And I got a lot of comments from you guys saying that I didn't understand what a multipolar world is. So I think in this video, I want to talk about how I view a multipolar world and give an idea of kind of what I think potentially China is working for. Obviously, I can't speak for China because I don't work for them. I'm not part of the government, but what I see a multipolar world has been, and then get some of your feedback in the comments if you agree or not. So when we think of multipolar, somebody in the comments was saying it's like a table and all the legs are underneath it to hold that table up, and each pole is holding up a table. And I get that idea, but I don't think that's what it's like at all. I think it's more like a tent. And if you've ever been to the circus or if you've ever been to the fair, you'll see a tent. And you'll have maybe one pole in the center that's at the top, then maybe you'll have two other poles off to the side. And maybe, depending on how big the tent is, you might have multiple poles. And then you have the perimeter where there's a lot of poles on the outside, making sure the whole tent stays together. And I think if we move towards a multipolar world, that's what we're going to be looking at. And this is when I said with China on top. Again, it was just a title. Obviously, YouTube requires you to be a little bit clickbaity, because if you don't, people won't click. And if they don't click, then this channel doesn't grow, and so forth and so on. I'm sure you guys can understand that. Oftentimes, my titles have to be taken with a pinch of salt, so to say, that a lot of times it's a little bit of an exaggeration to get people to click on it. But with that said, I think it's more like a tent, and there will be a pole that is kind of on top. The idea is right now we live with only one pole, and that's the United States. And you can't go to another side of the tent and get some kind of relief, whether that's economic relief in terms of a second currency. That could be an alternative currency. We've talked a lot about de-dollarization recently, but we don't have that right now. And so trade is mostly done in US dollars. I saw something when I was watching some of these other videos and reading articles. Most of the trade in the world is still like 60% is done in US dollars, which means more than half. And we're talking about like, trillions of dollars a year. So it's not easy just to step off of that. And currently we don't have another alternative. So when we talk about multipolar world, I think what we're looking at is there will be multiple currencies that we can trade in. There'll be multiple blocks that essentially influence their sphere. And so we have a lot of actual examples of this in the past, where the world wasn't so small with globalization, and we had multiple empires that were in Europe and in South America and in Asia. And you can go back to times when China was on top here in Asia, and then Japan was on top. And while those empires were on top, on the other side of the world, you had empires like the Mayans and the Incans, and you had in Europe, you had the Dutch and you had the French, all at the same time as like these other influences or these other countries or empires were affecting their local area. So what we could see moving forward is a Asia that is dominated by China, which is what I think they're pushing for. And then on the bigger scale, they have influence over things like trade. One of the big reasons why China is pushing so hard to to change things like the World Trade Organization and other organizations like the IMF and the World Bank is because when those were set up, China was very weak. And so now they feel like they're being treated unfairly, where they're one of the largest traders in the world. They trade with everyone. And I had a graph in the last video saying they're the top trading partner for like 120 nations. But they're under this WTO, the World Trade Organization, or they're under international laws that make it less beneficial for them. So they're saying, hey, let's rewrite some of these laws and let's rewrite some of these agreements and treaties to better reflect the world today. In the United States, has pretty much been opposed to that. And that's why we're having a bigger and bigger rift, because on the one hand, they're saying, look, this doesn't reflect the world that we live in anymore, and we want to rebalance that power a little bit. Again, multipolar. It's not saying that America has to fail in order for China to succeed. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. What they're saying, and this is my opinion of what they're saying, is that, look, we can dominate Asia, and then on a global scale, we can work in a more balanced and fair way. So you'd have a pole in Asia, which is dominated by China specifically. I mean, that's kind of what we're looking at. You might have a pole that is kind of central in kind of Eastern Europe that's dominated by Russia. And then you'd have a pole also in Europe that's maybe dominated by NATO or the European Union, because NATO actually probably needs to fall apart and get America out of NATO and let Europe be more independent. So it could be dominated by the European Union, with specifically France and Germany being kind of the bigger poles within the European Union. And then you could say, okay, Africa's such a large continent, so you could have maybe 3 poles: a northern African pole, like a central African pole, and a southern African pole, and those could be decided based on whichever countries are kind of the strongest. You might have in northern Africa, you might have Egypt, and some other kind of treaties that form in Egypt is the strongest one. Maybe more in the central area, you might have something like Nigeria, and then in South Africa, you might have like South Africa. Again, just throwing ideas out here, you probably have more ideas and maybe a better idea of how that could be broken up within the African continent. But that's kind of the idea. And then when we move to like the Americas, you might have South America dominated by like Brazil maybe, and then North America and Central America might be dominated by the United States. And then if you think about the Middle East, like Saudi Arabia and Iran might make some kind of agreement, and they become kind of the dominant players in some kind of a working agreement. Again, when we think about it of poles, we can say all these different poles around the world are sticking up, and you have somebody maybe more towards the top. And when I was saying China would be at the top, and could France accept it? Seeing the comments that Macron has made, he's obviously. Hello. 这是什么？
尾号是6770。
不行，在这儿。Quite package was showing up. Not for me, my neighbor. Anyways, yeah. So you could see that there are these different poles, and with China being kind of at the top, and that would be maybe doing away with the IMF, maybe doing away with the World Trade Organization and creating new structures, or if we don't do away with them, creating alternatives. And this is kind of what you see with the Belt and Road Initiative, where they have the Belt and Road Bank. I'd have to look up the actual name of it right now, but there's a bank that is part of the Belt and Road Initiative that has been handling a lot of these loans. When I think of a multipolar world, it's more of a tent, and there's different poles that are holding up different regions, so to say, with some of the bigger ones being more of a global reach. Because right now it seems like the United States is the global monopoly, kind of the one pole, and they've strong-armed the rest of the nations to support their agenda. And they've gone around the world to help hold up their one pole by putting military bases in, every nation that they can get their military bases in. And I think that's where a lot of people and a lot of nations are saying, hey, this is no longer fair, and we need something to balance this aggressive behavior by the United States. And throughout history, if we look back, it's mostly been multipolar. But after World War II, most of the nations were destroyed and were in the process of rebuilding. except for the United States. And although Russia was pretty badly destroyed, they were able to create a bloc and create the Soviet Union. And those were this dipolar world for a while until the Soviet Union fell, and then it was just the United States. So I think a lot of people are ready for a more balanced... My neighbor's always out. I don't know if you can pick that up on the mic. Anyways, so I think we're looking for a more balanced world where you have the alternative to go to another region or another player and say, hey, I don't have the best deal with the United States. Maybe I go check out what China's willing to offer me. Maybe I will go check out what Russia's willing to offer. It's like if you ever go into like a bidding war, the seller usually gets a better deal when there's multiple bidders. Right now, it's kind of like it's only the United States, and the United States says, do it our way or it won't get done. And so whenever there's a monopoly, it tends to cause a problem within the market. And so if we look at a global market, we might be wanting to have a world where we have multiple buyers, multiple options, whether that's construction, whether that's loans, whether that's military agreements, but just the concept of having multiple options makes things more fair, because then the United States can't say do it our way or be gone, because you say fine, I'll go to Brazil, I'll go to Europe, I'll go to Russia, I'll go to China, I'll go to whoever's going to give me the best deal, and then that it levels the playing field. But it doesn't mean that there won't be some nations that have more influence, and it won't mean that some nations aren't more at the top. So when I think when I make titles saying with China at the top, it's like, well, of course they're going to have more influence, specifically in Asia, because that's their backyard. As for the United States, will have more influence in North America, Central America, possibly South America, and maybe Europe, because they have strong partnerships still there with NATO and other things. But that's kind of my thought on what a multipolar world will look like as we move forward. And I think that will make things more balanced and will give smaller nations the opportunity to go find the best solution for whatever their problems might be, get the best loans, get the best infrastructure, because now they have multiple options and they don't just have to agree with the United States and do what the United States says. So I think that is actually a better world, and that's kind of my vision of what multipolar means, going back to what it used to be 100, 200 years ago, when there was multiple powers in multiple regions of the world. So let me know if you agree, and leave a comment below letting me know why you thought I was so wrong about multipolar, or if you still think I'm wrong and you think that it really will be fair. I just look at human history and it's never been fair. There's always been somebody at or near the top. What we'd like is at the top is to have multiple players at the top so that there's more balance. When there's just one, that's where problems can arise. So leave a comment below. And if you want to watch another video, you might find this one interesting here. And I will see you in the next video.